When I moved into the suburban house on Elm Street, I had every intention of starting fresh. It was my second marriage, and I was determined to make it work. The house was warm and inviting, the kind you see in family sitcoms. A neat lawn, white shutters, and a picket fence. Everything about it screamed American dream. My husband Alan had lived here with his late wife and their son Ryan for years before she passed. It was their family home, and now I had to find a way to make it feel like mine. Ryan was 22, older than I expected when I first heard Alan mention his kid. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and quiet. When I tried to make small talk at dinner, he'd answer in one-word responses or polite nods. His dark eyes rarely met mine, and there was an air of tension between us that I couldn't place. Alan, ever the optimist, brushed off the awkwardness. "Ryan's just adjusting," he'd say. "He'll warm up to you. Give it time." Time. I had plenty of it. Alan's job in finance kept him away most weekdays, leaving me alone in a house that didn't quite feel like home. I spent my days unpacking boxes, rearranging furniture, and trying to figure out how to fit into a life that had been fully established without me. Ryan mostly stayed out of my way. He worked part-time at a local gym and spent the rest of his time in his room or out with friends. I'd hear the faint thump of weights or the murmur of conversations on the phone, but we rarely crossed paths unless it was dinner. One evening I decided to make lasagna. Cooking had always been a way for me to connect with people, and I figured a homemade meal might help bridge the gap between us. When I called Ryan to the table, he hesitated before sitting down. He poked at the food with his fork but eventually took a bite. "This is good," he said, almost reluctantly. It was the first compliment he'd given me, and it caught me off guard. "Thank you," I said, smiling. "I'm glad you like it." For a moment, his expression softened. "My mom used to make lasagna," he added, almost as an afterthought. The comment hung in the air, and I didn't know how to respond. Comparing me to his mother felt like a losing battle, so I just nodded and changed the subject. That night, as I cleaned up the dishes, I caught Ryan watching me from the kitchen doorway. He didn't say anything, just stood there with an unreadable expression before turning and heading upstairs. As the days turned into weeks, the awkwardness persisted. Alan's absence didn't help. It often felt like Ryan and I were orbiting each other in a house that was too big for just the two of us. I'd find small ways to interact with him, offering him coffee, asking about his day. But our conversations rarely went beyond surface-level pleasantries. One afternoon, I decided to tackle the garage. It was cluttered with old boxes, tools, and sports equipment. Alan had suggested we clean it out together, but with his schedule, that never happened. As I wrestled with a particularly heavy box, Ryan appeared in the doorway. "Need help?" he asked. I was surprised but grateful. "That would be great, thanks." He stepped forward, effortlessly lifting the box I had been struggling with. "What's in here?" he asked, setting it down on the driveway. "I think it's old holiday decorations," I said, wiping sweat from my forehead. "Your dad said we should sort through them." Ryan nodded and started opening boxes. We worked side by side for the next hour, sorting through dusty ornaments and tangled strings of lights. It was the first time we'd spent more than a few minutes together without feeling awkward. I found myself laughing at his dry humor and quick wit, a side of him I hadn't seen before. By the time we finished, the tension between us had eased, if only slightly. As we stood in the driveway, surveying our work, I felt a small spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to coexist peacefully. That night, I called Alan to tell him about our progress. He sounded pleased but distracted, his mind already on the next day's meetings. After we hung up, I sat in the living room with a glass of wine, staring at the empty house around me. For the first time, I wondered if I had made a mistake marrying someone whose life left so little room for me. The sound of footsteps on the stairs pulled me from my thoughts. Ryan appeared in the doorway, hesitating before stepping into the room. "Can I sit?" he asked. "Of course," I said, gesturing to the couch. He sat down across from me, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, he broke the silence. "Do you like it here?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. I do, I said after a pause. It's different, but I'm trying to make it work. He nodded, his gaze steady. It's probably not easy, moving into someone else's house. No, it's not, I admitted. But I'm glad we're starting to get along. Ryan's lips twitched into a faint smile. Yeah, me too. For the first time, I felt like we were on the same page. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The days after our garage cleanup were smoother, though still far from perfect. Ryan and I found ourselves in each other's company more often, not by design but by circumstance. Alan's business trips stretched longer, and I began to feel like a placeholder in a life that wasn't truly mine. One morning, the kitchen faucet sprung a leak. Water pooled across the counter, dripping onto the floor in steady plops. I scrambled to find a towel, muttering curses under my breath. Ryan appeared in the doorway, dressed in his usual gym attire, a tight t-shirt and basketball shorts. What happened? He asked, stepping closer. The faucet's leaking, I said, pressing a towel against the base. I've no idea how to fix it. Let me see, he said, crouching down. His hands brushed mine as he took over, and I stepped back, watching as he fiddled with the pipes beneath the sink. You're good at this, I remarked, trying to lighten the mood. Dad's useless with tools, he replied with a smirk. Mom taught me how to handle this stuff. The mention of his mother stung, but I kept my expression neutral. Within minutes, Ryan had stopped the leak. He stood, wiping his hands on a rag, and glanced at me. Should hold for now. Might need a new gasket, though. Thank you, I said sincerely. I'll let Alan know. Ryan's gaze lingered for a moment longer than necessary. You're welcome, he said, his voice softer than usual. Over time, these small moments began to add up. We shared quiet breakfasts, exchanged brief conversations about his work, and even watched a movie together one evening when neither of us had other plans. I caught myself looking forward to these interactions, even though I knew I shouldn't. One Saturday afternoon, I decided to tackle the backyard. The weeds had overtaken the flower beds, and the once lush grass was patchy and overgrown. Ryan joined me, unprompted, with a pair of gloves and a rake. We worked in silence for a while, the sun beating down on us. Sweat glistened on his brow, and I found my eyes straying to the way his muscles flexed as he worked. You okay? He asked, breaking me out of my thoughts. Yeah, I said quickly, feeling a flush creep up my neck. Just tired. He offered a small smile. We're almost done. By the time we finished, the yard looked transformed. I stood back, hands on my hips, and admired our work. It looks great, I said. Yeah, it does, Ryan agreed, his voice low. Our eyes met, and for a brief moment, the air between us felt charged. I looked away, brushing dirt off my hands, and muttered something about needing to shower. As I walked back into the house, my heart pounded in my chest. Something was shifting between us, and I wasn't sure I was ready to face it. The following week passed in a haze. Ryan and I avoided any prolonged interaction, though the tension lingered in the air like an unspoken truth. I kept myself busy with errands and housework, while he spent more time at the gym or with his friends. Yet, every so often, I'd catch him watching me, his gaze heavy and unreadable, and my stomach would twist in ways I couldn't explain. One evening, after another long day of Alan's absence, I found myself curled up on the couch with a glass of wine. The house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of the floorboards. I had just started scrolling through channels when Ryan entered the room. Hey, he said, his voice tentative. Hey, I replied, trying to sound casual. Want to join me? He hesitated for a moment before nodding. Sure. He sat down at the opposite end of the couch, leaving a safe distance between us. We settled on a crime thriller, the kind of movie that demanded your attention. Yet, I found it hard to focus with him so close. Every movement he made, every shift in his posture, seemed amplified in the quiet room. Halfway through the movie, a particularly tense scene caused me to jump, spilling a bit of wine onto my shirt. Damn it, I muttered, grabbing a napkin to blot at the stain. You okay? Ryan asked, concern flickering across his face. Yeah, just clumsy, I said with a nervous laugh. He leaned closer, his hand brushing against mine as he reached for the napkin. Here, let me. The contact was brief, but it sent a jolt through me. I pulled back quickly, mumbling a thank you as I turned my attention back to the screen. My heart raced, and I couldn't help but wonder if he felt it too. The pull, the undeniable chemistry that seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. As the credits rolled, Ryan stood and stretched. I'm gonna head to bed. Good night, he said, his voice soft. Good night, I replied, watching as he disappeared up the stairs. I sat there for a long time, the empty wine glass in my hand, trying to make sense of the emotions swirling inside me. This wasn't supposed to happen. He was my stepson, a part of the life I had chosen when I married Alan. Yet, in that moment, it felt like the lines between right and wrong were beginning to blur. The tension between us came to a head the following weekend. Alan was still away on business, and the house felt eerily empty. I had spent the afternoon tidying up, trying to distract myself from the persistent hum of unease that seemed to settle in my chest whenever I thought about Ryan. That evening, I decided to order pizza and watch a movie. Ryan came downstairs as I was setting the boxes on the coffee table. Hungry? I asked, trying to keep my voice light. Yeah, thanks, he replied, sitting down next to me on the couch. He was close, closer than usual, and I felt my pulse quicken. We ate in silence, the TV providing a comfortable background noise. When the movie started, Ryan leaned back, his arm resting casually along the back of the couch. I tried to focus on the screen, but his presence was impossible to ignore. Halfway through the movie, he shifted, his knee brushing against mine. The touch was fleeting, but it sent a wave of heat through me. I glanced at him, expecting to see an apology in his expression, but instead his gaze was steady and unflinching. Is everything okay? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Yeah, he said, his tone equally soft. Is it okay if I stay here for a bit? I nodded, unable to form a coherent response. The room seemed to shrink, the space between us charged with an energy I couldn't ignore. He reached out, his hand brushing against mine, and this time, I didn't pull away. The moment stretched on, the sound of the movie fading into the background. My heart raced as his fingers laced with mine, the unspoken connection between us growing stronger with each passing second. We shouldn't, I started, but my voice faltered. I know, he replied, his eyes locked on mine. But I can't help it. Neither could I. The boundaries we had carefully maintained were crumbling, and in that moment, I wasn't sure I wanted to stop it. The days following that night were a whirlwind of emotions, each one more confusing than the last. I tried to avoid Ryan, burying myself in housework and errands, but it was impossible to escape the memory of his touch. Every glance he threw my way felt loaded. Every accidental brush of hands set my nerves alight. Alan came home that Friday, oblivious to the tension brewing beneath the surface. He kissed my cheek and patted Ryan on the shoulder, eager to hear about our week. Ryan played the role of the dutiful son, and I forced a smile, hoping it was convincing enough. Over dinner, Alan talked about his trip, rattling off anecdotes about meetings and hotel mishaps. I nodded in the right places, but my mind was elsewhere. Across the table, Ryan's eyes occasionally met mine, his gaze unreadable. Later that evening, Alan suggested we open a bottle of wine. To celebrate the weekend, he said, already heading for the kitchen. Ryan excused himself, mumbling something about being tired. I watched him leave, my chest tightening with an ache I couldn't name. Alan and I sat on the couch, glasses in hand, the television droning on in the background. He leaned back, one arm draped around my shoulders, and sighed contentedly. It's good to be home. I forced a smile. It is. But it didn't feel like home. Not anymore. The tension between Ryan and me became unbearable as the days turned into weeks. I could feel it simmering beneath the surface every time we were in the same room, a pressure building that neither of us seemed capable of releasing. Alan, oblivious as always, continued his business trips, leaving us alone to navigate the charged atmosphere. One afternoon, I found myself in the kitchen, absent-mindedly chopping vegetables for dinner. The hum of the dishwasher filled the silence, but my thoughts were loud and chaotic. I didn't hear Ryan come in until he was standing right behind me. "Hey," he said softly. I startled, nearly dropping the knife. "You scared me," I said with a nervous laugh, turning to face him. "Sorry," he murmured, but he didn't step back. "Are you okay?" I nodded, though my hands trembled. "Just distracted." Ryan reached out, his hand brushing mine as he took the knife from my grasp. "You shouldn't hold this if you're not focused," he said, his voice low. The proximity made my breath catch. I took a step back, pressing my palms against the edge of the counter for support. I should finish dinner." "You've been avoiding me," he said, cutting through my attempt to change the subject. "No, I haven't," I replied too quickly, my voice unconvincing even to myself. "You have," he insisted, stepping closer. "And I get it. But I think we need to talk about what's happening." I shook my head, panic rising in my chest. "Nothing is happening, Ryan. It's in your head." He exhaled sharply, his frustration evident. "You know that's not true." The room seemed to shrink around us, the air thick with unspoken words. I turned away, gripping the counter as if it could ground me. "This has to stop. Whatever this is, it's wrong." "Maybe it is," he said, his voice softer now. "But that doesn't change how I feel, and I don't think it changes how you feel either." Tears pricked my eyes, and I hated myself for the weakness. "Ryan, please, we can't—" "I'll stop," he interrupted, his tone firm. "If that's what you really want, I'll stop. But you have to tell me. Say it, and I'll walk away right now." I turned to face him, my resolve wavering under the intensity of his gaze. The weight of his words hung between us, a choice I wasn't ready to make. The truth was, I didn't know what I wanted. My heart and my mind were at war, and I felt trapped in the middle. "Ryan," I began, my voice breaking. The sound of the front door opening shattered the moment. Alan's cheerful voice called out from the hallway. "I'm home!" Ryan stepped back immediately, his expression unreadable. "We'll talk later," he said quietly, before turning and walking out of the kitchen. I stood there, frozen, as Alan entered the room and kissed my cheek. "Something smells good," he said, oblivious to the storm brewing just beneath the surface. I forced a smile, wiping my hands on a towel. "Dinner will be ready soon." But inside, I knew nothing would ever be the same again.